Inside the Void nightclub. Heavy bass, flashing purple and blue strobe lights. Park Tae-Sung stands on the VIP balcony. Suddenly, a woman in a black leather dress stumbles violently into her chest, grabbing his belt with both hands to steady herself. The music thumped, the lights flashed, and the most feared man in Seoul stood frozen as a girl in a cheap black dress grabbed his belt and unzipped his pants in front of 500 people. The crowd gasps. Tae-Sung looks down, his mouth open in pure shock and rage. The girl isn't looking at his face, her eyes are locked intensely on her waistline. Her hands are moving fast. It looked like a drunken mistake. Or a desperate attempt at seduction. Tae-Sung's men were 1 second away from putting a bullet in her. But as she fumbled with his buckle, her eyes weren't glazed with alcohol. They were razor sharp. She didn't look up at him with lust, she looked at him with terrifying focus. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the bass. "Smile like you're enjoying it. Your lieutenant planted a wire on your belt." Tae-Sung's eyes widened. He glances at his lieutenant standing nearby, then back down at the girl. She pulls a tiny metallic object from the lining of his belt. "Stay with me, because this wasn't a scandal. It was a rescue mission. And if she stops acting drunk for even a second, the police listening in are going to raid the building." 20 minutes before the world crashed into his chest, Park Tae-Sung was standing at the edge of the world, or at least, the part of it that mattered. From the VIP balcony of the Void, the dance floor below looked like a churning sea of flesh and neon. 2,000 bodies moved in sync to a bass line so heavy it rattled the ice in the crystal tumblers. To anyone else, it was a party. To Tae-Sung, it was an engine. Every pulse of the strobe light printed money. Every beat cemented his reign as the untouchable emperor of Gangnam. He took a sip of 30-year-old scotch, letting the burn settle in his chest. He was wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than a luxury sedan, tailored to hide the scars of his ascent and accentuate the power of his arrival. Tonight wasn't just a Friday, it was the coronation. The merger with the Yamaguchi syndicate was done. The ink was dry. The borders were closed. "It's a beautiful view, Hyungnim," a voice said from the shadows. Tae-Sung didn't turn. He knew the voice better than his own. Lieutenant Choi, his right hand. His shadow, the man who had taken a knife for him in Busan 5 years ago. "It's not just a view, Choi," Tae-Sung replied, swirling his glass. "It's the future. By midnight, the Japanese will wire the first installment. We won't just run the night anymore. We'll own the dawn." 2. Choi stepped into the purple light. He looked impeccable, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who had won the lottery. He reached out and poured more scotch into Tae-Sung's glass. His hand steady. "You built this from the dirt," Choi said, his tone dripping with reverence. "The police can't touch us. The rivals are dead or bought. You're ghost-proof." Tae-Sung chuckled, a rare sound. He turned to face his brother-in-arms, clapping a heavy hand on Choi's shoulder. He felt the solid muscle beneath the fabric, the physical reality of loyalty. "We built this," Tae-Sung corrected. "A king is nothing without his generals. Remember that." "I never forgot," Choi said. He glanced briefly at Tae-Sung's waist, where the heavy silver buckle of his belt caught the strobe light. "To the family. May nothing ever break the circle. To the family." Tae-Sung downed the drink. He felt invincible. He had absolute power, infinite wealth, and a brother he would trust with his life. He turned back to the balcony railing, leaning his hips against the chrome, surveying his empire with a hunger that was finally starting to feel like satisfaction. He adjusted his belt, tightening it slightly, completely unaware that the cold metal Against his stomach wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a beacon, broadcasting his location. And every word he spoke to a police van parked 2 streets away. He checked his watch. 11:42 p.m. The night was perfect. Not a single thing could go wrong. The velvet ropes guarding the VIP section were meant to stop mortals, but they didn't account for a hurricane in 4-inch heels. Rina Seo didn't walk past the security checkpoint, she cared through it. She was a blur of chaotic motion, a girl who looked like she had started drinking at noon and hadn't stopped since. Her hair was a bird's nest of dark waves, her mascara slightly smudged. And she was clutching a half-empty bottle of cheap soju that definitely hadn't been sold at the bar. Woo! Gangnam style, she shrieked, the sound cutting through the heavy bass like a jagged knife. She spun around, wild and uncoordinated, and slammed directly into a waiter carrying a tray of crystal flutes. The crash was spectacular. Glass shattered, champagne sprayed across the expensive leather banquettes, and the waiter yelped. On the balcony, Lieutenant Choi stiffened, his hand flying to the gun inside his jacket. Tae-Sung frowned, annoyed that the noise had interrupted his perfect silence. Get her out, Choi barked into his earpiece. Quietly. 2 massive security guards stationed at the balcony entrance moved to intercept. They were professionals, trained to handle rowdy drunks with minimal fuss. The first guard, a man the size of a refrigerator, reached out to grab Rina's arm. Miss, you need to. Rina pivoted. To the untrained eye, it looked like a clumsy stumble, her heel catching on the carpet. But the timing was mathematical. She dipped her shoulder exactly 2 inches under the guard's grasping hand, spinning away with a giggle that sounded hysterical. Don't touch the goods, she slurred, flinging her arms wide. The second guard moved in to box her out. He lunged, trying to pin her against the wall. Rina tripped forward, her momentum carrying her low. She practically slid under his arm, using the slick champagne on the floor to skid past him. It was a miracle of physics, or pure, dumb luck. She wasn't just stumbling aimlessly. Every lurch, every sway, every near fall was propelling her in a straight line toward the only thing that mattered, the man in the bespoke suit standing by the railing. Tae-Sung watched her approach with a look of cold distance. She was everything he despised, messy, loud, uncontrolled. She was a stain on his perfect evening. Stop her, Tae-Sung ordered, not bothering to raise his voice. Choi stepped forward to block her path, but Rina was moving too fast now. She feigned a trip, her knees buckling, transforming her forward momentum into a desperate, flailing dive. She wasn't trying to stay upright anymore. She was a missile, and she had acquired her target. She crashed into Tae-Sung's chest with the force of a car wreck, knocking the wind out of him and driving him back against the railing. Her hands didn't go for his face or his arms to break her fall. They went straight for his waist. The sound of the zipper was a thunderclap that somehow cut through the pounding bass of the club. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an eternity of horrified silence. Tae-Sung looked down, his brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of the woman kneeling before him. His hands balled into fists, ready to crush her skull, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Cold. There was no haze of alcohol in her gaze. It was clear, cold, and terrified. Don't move, she hoisted, her voice a razor blade against the thrum of the speakers. Smile like you're enjoying it. Before Tae-Sung could react, Rina reached into the neckline of her dress. She wasn't reaching for skin, she pulled out a cheap, hot pink tube of lipstick. With a flick of her thumb, she twisted the base, not to reveal wax, but to activate a microscopic chaotic scrambler. A faint, high-pitched whine, audible only to them, created a 3-meter bubble of digital static. You have 30 seconds before the police realize their feed is dead, she whispered, leaning her forehead against his belt buckle as if overwhelmed by passion. Listen to me. Your lieutenant sold you out. There is a microtransmitter stitched into the lining of your belt. They heard the merger. They heard everything. Tae-Sung's eyes snapped up to Lieutenant Choi. The man was standing 5 feet away, his hand hovering near his jacket, a look of confused disgust on his face. He wasn't moving to help. He was waiting. Liar, Tae-Sung breathed, though the doubt was already blooming in his chest like an infection. Watch, Rina commanded. She didn't fumble. Her hands, which had looked so clumsy moments ago, moved with the dexterity of a bomb technician. She ran her fingers along the inner stitching of his expensive Italian leather belt, searching for the anomaly. She found it near the second loop, a tiny, hard lump no bigger than a grain of rice. She dug her fingernail into the leather. It took a second of violent effort, masking the motion by feigning a drunken sway against his legs. With a sharp tear, she ripped the lining open. Tae-Sung felt the tug at his waist. He looked down just as Rina pulled her hand away. Pinched. Between her thumb and forefinger was a black, metallic bug, its tiny red light blinking rapidly before dying out under the interference of the lipstick jammer. The evidence was undeniable. Tae-Sung felt the world tilt. The man he called brother had tagged him like cattle. Rina dropped the bug into her drink glass, drowning it in vodka. She looked up at him, the drunk girl mask slipping entirely to reveal the operative underneath. The police van is 2 blocks east, she said, her voice urgent. When the static hits, they'll know the jig is up. They're coming for a raid, not an arrest. We need to move, and we need to do it now. 2 blocks away, a surveillance tech tore his headphones off as Rina's jammer turned the audio feed into an ear-splitting shriek. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was a flatline. The police captain in the front seat didn't wait for confirmation. He slammed his fist on the dashboard. They found it. Breach. Breach now. Inside the void, the illusion of paradise shattered instantly. The heavy bass that shook the floorboards cut out mid-beat, replaced by the jarring, distinct sound of flashbangs detonating in the lobby. The club's mesmerizing purple strobes died, replaced by the harsh, blinding white of the venue's emergency work lights. Police. Everybody down. Hands on your heads. The roar came from a dozen throats at once, echoing up from the dance floor as a phalanx of armored tactical officers swarmed through the shattered front entrance. The sea of dancers dissolved into a stampede of screaming, terrified civilians. On the balcony, time seemed to fracture. Lieutenant Choi's smooth composition cracked. He didn't rush to protect Tae-Sung. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes darting toward the service exit, his hand twitching toward his waistband. It wasn't the reaction of a loyal soldier concerned for his boss, it was the panic of a rat whose trap had snapped too early. Tae-Sung looked from the black bug drowning in the vodka glass to the man he had called a brother. The betrayal hit him harder than a bullet. The wire. The timing of the merger. The raid. It all aligned perfectly. If Rina hadn't jammed the signal, the police would have heard the admission of guilt live, and Tae-Sung would be in handcuffs, or a body bag, by now. Boss, move. The head of security lunged forward, not at the police, but at Rina. To him, she was still the crazy drunk who had assaulted the emperor, a distraction that had allowed the police to get this close. He grabbed her by the shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh, raising his other hand to strike her down. She sets us up, the guard roared, pulling his gun. I'll kill her. Rina didn't scream. She didn't fight the guard's grip, knowing it would waste precious seconds. She just looked at Tae-Sung, her dark eyes locking onto him with an intensity that demanded he make a choice. Trust the brother who sold you, or the stranger who saved you? Tae-Sung moved. He didn't run for the exit. He stepped toward his security chief, his face a mask of cold fury. He grabbed the guard's wrist, the one raising the gun, and twisted it down. With brutal efficiency. Let her go, Tae-Sung ordered, his voice low and terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos. But Gangnam, I said let go. Tae-Sung ripped Rina free, pulling her behind him. He shielded her with his own body, turning his back on his confused men to face the oncoming storm. He looked at Rina, acknowledging the debt with a single, sharp nod. She's with me. The elevator, Tae-Sung barked, dragging Rina toward the gilded private elevator at the rear of the balcony. We take the helipad. Rina dug her heels into the carpet, yanking him to a halt with surprising strength. The elevator is a coffin, she snapped, her eyes scanning the chaos below. The police cut the power to the main grid 2 minutes ago. If you step in there, you're trapped. If you make it to the roof, their chopper is already waiting. You're boxed in. Tae-Sung looked at the heavy steel doors of his private escape route, then back at the woman who had just appended his reality. Then we fight our way out the back. No, Rina shook her head, grabbing his lapel. The back exit leads to the alley where the tactical team breached. There is only one way out that isn't swarming with cops or traitors. She pointed to a narrow, unmarked door tucked behind the DJ booth, a door Tae-Sung had ignored for years. The laundry chute access. It connects to the sub-basement maintenance tunnels. They vent out into the subway station 3 blocks west. Tae-Sung stared at her. That tunnel has been sealed since the 90s. Not on the city municipal blueprints I memorized this morning, Rina countered, pushing him toward it. Move, unless you want to explain the wire to the SWAT team coming up the stairs. Tae-Sung didn't argue. He kicked the door open, plunging them into a narrow concrete stairwell. That smelled of stale beer and damp rot. The thumping bass of the club was instantly replaced by the hum of industrial ventilation. Rina took the lead, moving with a tactical fluidity that betrayed her training. She didn't stumble in the dark, she flowed through it. They reached the bottom landing, bursting into a maze of steam pipes and exposed wiring. This was the gut of the beast, far from the polished luxury above. But they weren't alone. 3 figures stepped out from the shadows of a cross-junction. They wore the signature black suits of the Void security detail. Tae-Sung slowed, relief washing over him. Secure the perimeter, he ordered. We need a clear path to the... He stopped. The men weren't looking at the tunnel entrance for police. They were looking at him. And their weapons weren't holstered. I'm sorry, Gangnam, the center guard said, raising a silenced pistol. Choi said no loose ends. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than the wire. These were men he had paid, fed, and protected. Men who had sworn oaths on their blood. And now, for a higher bidder, they were ready to put a bullet in his chest. Rina reacted before the trigger could break. She grabbed a hanging steam pipe lever and yanked it down hard. A jet of scalding white steam exploded into the corridor, shielding the gunman. Now, she screamed. Tae-Sung moved like a demon. He dove through the steam, crashing into the lead gunman. The pistol discharged, the bullet sparking harmlessly against the concrete ceiling. Tae-Sung didn't feel afraid, he felt only a cold, dark rage. He disarmed the man with a bone-shattering twist of the wrist and used him as a human shield against the other 2. It was a brutal, ugly fight in the dark. No martial arts elegance, just elbows, knees, and the desperate struggle for survival. Rina wasn't idle, she grabbed a discarded length of conduit and swung it into the knee of the second attacker, dropping him long enough for Tae-Sung to finish the job. When silence finally returned to the tunnel, Three men lay groaning on the wet concrete. Tae-Sung stood over them, chest heaving, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. He looked at Rina, who was already moving toward the far grate. "Your empire is burning, Tae-Sung," she said, her voice grim. "If we want to survive the night, you need to stop acting like a king and start fighting like a ghost." The safe house was a concrete box in the industrial district, smelling of dust and neglect, but it was off the grid. The moment the heavy steel door clicked shut, the adrenaline that had sustained Tae-Sung evaporated, replaced by a throbbing ache in his ribs and a cold, paranoid fury. He didn't sit down. He paced the small room like a caged tiger, his torn suit jacket discarded on the floor. Rina sat on a crate, calmly checking the magazine of a stolen pistol. She didn't look like a party girl anymore. In the harsh light of a single bulb, she looked like a weapon. Tae-Sung stopped pacing. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing the gun from his hands and slamming it onto the table. "Enough," he growled. "No more games. You knew the blueprints. You knew the frequency of the wire. You fight like a special ops soldier." He leaned in, his shadow swallowing her. "Who are you? And don't tell me you're a waitress." Rina looked up at him, unflinching. She reached into her boot and pulled out a small first aid kit. "Sit down, Tae-Sung. You're bleeding. Answer me." He slammed his fist against the wall, rattling the dust. "You saved my life, but you also dismantled my empire in 20 minutes. I need a name." "Rina Co," she said quietly, opening an alcohol wipe. "Formerly of the National Intelligence Service, Domestic Espionage Division." Tae-Sung froze. "The NIS. The natural predator of men like him." "You're a Fed?" "Ex-Fed," she corrected, her voice bitter. "Disavowed. Dishonored. Burned." She stood up and walked over to him, fearless in the face of his rage. She pressed the alcohol wipe to a cut on his cheek, stinging him into silence. 3 years ago, I was investigating a corruption ring within the police force. High-level bribery, evidence tampering, murder for hire. I got close to the source. Too close." She pulled back, her dark eyes hardening. "The man running the ring framed me. He planted drugs in my car, wiped my service record, and leaked my file to every gang in Seoul. I lost my badge, my reputation, and my life." Tae-Sung watched her, his mind racing. "What does that have to do with me?" "The man who ruined me is Captain Min," Rina said, spitting the name like poison. "The same police captain who led the raid on your club tonight. The same captain your brother Choi has been feeding information to for months." The realization hit Tae-Sung with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a conspiracy. Choi hadn't just sold him out for money, he had sold him to the most corrupt cop in the city. "Choi pays Min for protection," Rina continued, "and Min uses Choi to take over the underworld. You were the only obstacle left. They needed you gone tonight to finalize their partnership." She stepped back, crossing her arms. "I didn't save you because I like you, Tae-Sung. I saved you because you're the only man powerful enough to help me kill them both." Tae-Sung looked at the disgraced agent, seeing the mirror of his own vengeance in his eyes. The lines of the world had shifted. The criminal and the cop were no longer enemies, they were the only 2 people left on the board. "I have a boat in Incheon," Tae-Sung said, shoving a fresh magazine into the stolen pistol. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold, hard logic of survival. "If we leave now, we can be in international waters by sunrise. I have accounts in Macau they can't touch." Rina didn't move from her crate. She watched him pack the few meager supplies the safe house offered, her expression unreadable. "So that's it? The viper of Gangnam turns into a rat, scurrying for a hole?" Tae-Sung paused, his jaw tightening. It's not running. It's regrouping. I can't fight an army with one gun and a disgraced spy. It's suicide, she countered, her voice sharp. Choi and Captain Min control the ports. They control the highways. If you try to run, you'll be intercepted and executed in a ditch before you even see the ocean. There is no escape, Tae-Sung. There is only the offensive. I am outnumbered and outgunned, Tae-Sung snapped, turning on her. I built that organization. I know exactly how efficient they are at killing. Then use that against them. Rina stood up, walking into his personal space. Choi is arrogant. He thinks he's already won. He thinks you're terrified and bleeding out in a gutter. If you run, you prove him right. If you fight, you remind him why he was always second best. Tae-Sung looked at her, seeing the fire that burned beneath her calm exterior. She was right. Running was a death sentence. Fighting was a gamble, but at least the dice were in his hands. How? He asked. We don't know where they are, but they have the entire city looking for us. Rina reached into her pocket and pulled out the soggy, metallic bug she had salvaged from the vodka glass back at the club. She placed it on the rusted table between them. We tell them exactly where to find us. She pulled out the pink lipstick jammer. The moment I deactivate this, the transmitter goes live. It's damaged from the alcohol, so the signal will be fuzzy, but the audio will get through. Choi is listening. He's waiting for a mistake. Tae-Sung understood immediately. A grim, predatory smile touched his lips. We feed them a lie. We feed them what they want, Rina corrected. A dying king. A desperate location. We lure Choi out of his fortress and into a kill box. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere you control. Tae-Sung thought for a second. The Seongsu textile warehouse. It's abandoned. It's a maze of rusted machinery and catwalks. I know every inch of it. Perfect, Rina said. She held her finger over the jammer. Act hurt. Act scared. Make him believe the crown is already his. She twisted the lipstick case. The faint hum of the jammer died. The red light on the bug flickered to life. Tae-Sung leaned close to the table, his voice shifting instantly into a wet, ragged gasp. Choi. That bastard. He wheezed, hitting the metal surface to simulate a stumble. I can't, the bleeding won't stop. Rina, get me to Seongsu. The old textile mill. I have a stash there. Stay with me. Rina cried out, her voice pitching up in perfect, panicked desperation. We're almost there. Just hold on. She clicked the jammer back on. The room fell silent. Tae-Sung straightened up, the weakness vanishing instantly. He checked the chamber of his gun, his eyes cold and hard as flint. He'll come, Tae-Sung said softly. He won't be able to resist watching me die. Then let's go, Rina said, heading for the door. We have a funeral to arrange. The rain hammered against the corrugated iron roof of the Seongsu textile mill, a deafening roar that masked the sound of breathing in the dark. Tae-Sung sat in a rusted office chair in the center of the vast, empty floor, a solitary figure illuminated by a single flickering floodlight. He slumped forward, clutching his side, playing the part of the dying king. Headlights swept across the high windows. Tires screeched on wet concrete. Doors slammed. Sweep the perimeter, a voice echoed from the loading dock. If the girl moves, put her down. But the boss is mine. Lieutenant Choi walked into the pool of light. He wore a raincoat over his suit, his face twisted into a mask of triumphant pity. He held a pistol loosely at his side, savoring the moment. Two of his men fanned out into the shadows, their footsteps heavy on the metal catwalks. Look at you, Choi said, stopping 10 feet away. the emperor of Gangnam. Sitting on a broken chair in a rat-infested warehouse. Tae-Sung didn't look up. Why, Choi? I gave you everything. Money. Power. Respect. You gave me scraps. Choi spat, his composition cracking. You gave me orders. You sat on the throne while I did the bleeding. Captain Min offered me the city, Tae-Sung. All I had to do was cut the head off the snake. Choi raised his gun, aiming for Tae-Sung's heart. Goodbye, brother. Click. The floodlight died. Total darkness swallowed the room. In the rafters, Rena moved. A suppressed shot coughed from the catwalk, followed by the wet thumb of a body hitting the floor. Then another shot. The second guard fell. It's a trap. Choi screamed, firing blindly into the dark. The muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse. In strobe light bursts of terror. Tae-Sung moved. He didn't need light, he knew the layout of this hell by heart. He came out of the blackness like a wraith, slamming into Choi before the lieutenant could reload. The gun clattered away across the concrete. They crashed into a pile of rusted loom parts. It wasn't a fight of technique, it was a brawl of hatred. Choi drew a knife, slashing wildly, cutting a line across Tae-Sung's forearm. Tae-Sung ignored the pain. He grabbed Choi's collar and drove him backward into a steel pillar. You weren't a snake, Tae-Sung snarled, driving his knee into Choi's gut. You were a parasite. Choi wasted, spitting blood, but slashed again, desperate and feral. Tae-Sung caught the wrist. Mid-swing. He heard the bone snap before Choi screamed. With a surge of cold, final strength, Tae-Sung twisted the knife from Choi's grip and drove it deep into the traitor's chest. They freeze, locked in a gruesome embrace. The rain pounded on the roof, louder than ever. Choi's eyes widened, his ambition fading into shock. He slumped against Tae-Sung, his breath rattling wetly in his throat. I just wanted. Choi wheezed, his hand clutching Tae-Sung's jacket. I know, Tae-Sung whispered, his voice void of victory. But the throne is heavy, Choi. It would have crushed you. He stepped back, letting the body slide to the floor. Rena dropped down from the catwalk, landing silently beside him. She didn't say a word. She just watched as Tae-Sung stood over the corpse of his best friend, the rain leaking through the roof to wash the blood away. The purge was complete, but the silence it left behind was deafening. 2 weeks later, the void breathed again. The purple strobe lights cut through the haze of dry ice, and the bass line thumped with a rhythm that felt like a restarted heart. The shattered glass had been replaced, the blood scrubbed from the concrete, and the velvet ropes were once again holding back a sea of desperate souls begging for entry. Park Tae-Sung stood on the VIP balcony, his hands resting on the chrome railing. He wore a new suit, midnight blue, cut sharp enough to draw blood. He looked down at his empire, but the hunger that had defined him 2 weeks ago was gone. In its place was a terrifying clarity. The illusion of brotherhood was dead, buried in a wet warehouse in Seongsu. What remained was pure, cold efficiency. He didn't turn when he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to. He knew the cadence, light, deliberate, and lethal. The security grid is green, a voice said, clear and void of any slur. The new scanners are picking up everything. A politician's son tried to bring in a recording device. We escorted him out. Before he reached the coat check, Tae-Sung turned slowly. Rena Seo stood in the entrance of the balcony, bathed in the neon glow. The cheap black dress and the messy hair were gone, erased as if they had never existed. In their place, she wore a tailored black tuxedo suit that fit her frame like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. She didn't look like a waitress, or a drunk, or a spy on the run. She looked like the gatekeeper of the underworld. She walked to the small table where the bottle of 30-year-old scotch sat. With steady hands, she poured 2 glasses. No ice. Captain Min? Tae-Sung asked, taking the glass she offered. Resigned this morning, Rena replied coolly, taking a sip of her own drink. Cited health reasons after an anonymous package containing his offshore bank records arrived at the prosecutor's office. He's on a flight to Vietnam. He won't be back. Tae-Sung nodded. It was a cleaner end than Min deserved, but a removed threat was a removed threat. He looked at Rena, really looked at her. He realized he didn't know her favorite color, or if she had family, or what she did on her days off. And he realized he didn't care. He knew she could strip a wire in 10 seconds. He knew she could shoot in the dark. He knew she wouldn't hesitate. That was better than love. That was better than family. They're calling you the Viper now, Tae-Sung said, gesturing to the crowd below where whispers of the new female enforcer were already circulating. They say you came out of nowhere. Let them talk, Rena said, stepping up to the railing beside him. She looked out at the turning sea of bodies, her expression matching his, detached, observant, sovereign. Fear is good for prophets. Tae-Sung raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. He glanced at the empty space where Lieutenant Choi used to stand, then looked at the woman who had taken his place. The emptiness in his chest had settled into a hard, unbreakable stone. To the new era, he murmured. Rena clinked her glass against his, the sound sharp and final. No more secrets, boss, she said, her eyes locking onto him. Just business.